long before universities, long before modern science, and long before the world became what it is today. One man began asking questions that people are still trying to answer over 2,000 years later. What is justice? What is truth? What makes a good life? And why do some people lead while others simply follow? His name was Plato. And although he lived thousands of years ago, his ideas continue to influence schools, governments, psychology, and philosophy across the world. So grab your coffee, sit back, relax, and listen carefully until the end. Because today you'll discover the fascinating life of Plato, the teacher who shaped generations of thinkers, the lessons that survived centuries, and why his wisdom remains surprisingly relevant in our modern world. Let's begin with Chapter 1, The Young Man Who Searched for Wisdom. Before we start, can I ask you one question? A year from now, will your English be better than it is today? Or will you still be saying, "I'll start next week"? The truth is, most people don't fail because English is difficult. They fail because they never truly commit to it. That's why, for a limited time, I've reduced the price of the Native Flow English coaching experience to just $5. Not because it's worth only $5, but because I don't want money to be the reason you never start. For less than the price of a coffee, you can begin building a skill that can stay with you for the rest of your life. If you've been waiting for a sign, this is it. Click the link in the description. Join us today, and I'll see you inside. Now, let's begin today's lesson. Chapter 1, The Young Man Who Searched for Wisdom. Before Plato became one of the greatest philosophers in history, he was simply a young man growing up in one of the most fascinating cities in the ancient world. That city was Athens, a place filled with artists, politicians, writers, soldiers, and thinkers. It was a city where people didn't just work. They debated, they questioned, they challenged ideas, and honestly, there couldn't have been a better place for someone who was naturally curious. Plato was born around 428 BC into a wealthy and influential family. From the moment he was born, people expected great things from him. His family believed he would probably enter politics. After all, many of his relatives already held important positions in Athenian society. Everything seemed planned. A successful career, a respected name, a comfortable life. But life had something completely different waiting for him. Now imagine being a young man surrounded by power and opportunity. Most people would simply follow the path prepared for them. Plato almost did, until he met one extraordinary person, a man who owned no great fortune, no luxurious house, no political office. Yet he possessed something even more valuable, wisdom. That man was Socrates. The moment Plato began listening to Socrates, his life changed forever. Socrates didn't stand in front of crowds giving long speeches. Instead, he asked questions, simple questions, questions that sounded easy but became impossible to answer. What is courage? What is justice? What is wisdom? People thought they knew the answers, until Socrates kept asking another question, and another, and another. Little by little, their certainty disappeared. That's what made him different. He wasn't trying to tell people what to think. He wanted to teach them how to think. And honestly, that lesson became the foundation of Plato's entire philosophy. Now imagine walking through the streets of Athens with Socrates. There was no classroom, no whiteboard, no textbooks. The city itself became the classroom. Every conversation became a lesson. Every disagreement became an opportunity to learn. For Plato, this was unlike anything he had ever experienced. He realized something powerful. Knowledge wasn't about memorizing facts. It was about asking better questions. Now, here's something fascinating. Many people today are afraid of saying, "I don't know." Socrates believed those three words were actually the beginning of wisdom, because the moment you admit you don't know something, your mind becomes ready to learn. Think about that. The greatest obstacle to learning isn't ignorance. It's believing you already know everything. That idea had a profound effect on Plato. It taught him to remain curious, to question assumptions, and to search for truth instead of easy answers. Now let's talk about Athens itself. Although it was one of the most advanced cities of its time, it also faced political conflict, war, and social division. People disagreed about leadership, justice, and the future of their society. Plato watched all of this with great interest. He began asking himself questions that still matter today. What makes a good leader? Can power exist without wisdom? Can a society truly succeed if its leaders don't understand justice? Those questions would later inspire some of the most influential books ever written. Now here's the turning point. One day, Socrates was accused of corrupting young people and disrespecting the traditional beliefs of Athens. He was put on trial. Many people expected him to apologize, to change his ideas, to save himself. But Socrates refused. He chose to remain faithful to his principles, even when he knew it might cost him his life. Eventually, he was sentenced to death. Imagine being Plato, watching your teacher, your mentor, the man who had transformed your entire way of thinking, being condemned for asking questions. It was heartbreaking. And honestly, that moment changed Plato forever. He became deeply disappointed with politics and the justice system of his time. But instead of giving up, he made a different decision. If society lacked wise leaders, perhaps the solution wasn't to complain. Perhaps the solution was to educate better thinkers, better leaders, better human beings. That single idea would shape the rest of his life. Before we finish this chapter, remember this. Plato didn't become one of history's greatest thinkers because he believed he had all the answers. He became great because he never stopped asking questions. And sometimes, one great teacher, one meaningful conversation, or one powerful question can completely change the direction of your life. In the next chapter, we'll discover how Plato turned tragedy into one of the greatest educational missions in history by founding a school that would influence the world for thousands of years. Chapter 2: The Academy That Changed the World. Imagine losing the person who inspired your entire way of thinking, your teacher, your mentor, the person who taught you to question everything. For many people, that would have been the end of the story. For Plato, it was only the beginning. The death of Socrates left a deep wound, not only in Plato's heart, but in the way he viewed society. He had watched one of the wisest men he had ever known be sentenced to death, not because he committed a violent crime, not because he stole, not because he wanted power, but because he asked difficult questions. That experience forced Plato to ask an even bigger question. If a society can condemn its wisest people, how can it ever become truly just? He didn't have the answer yet, but he knew where he needed to begin: education. Now imagine Plato leaving Athens for a while. He traveled to different parts of the ancient world. He met scholars, observed different governments, learned about mathematics, politics, science, and philosophy. Every journey expanded his understanding. And honestly, great thinkers rarely stop learning. They understand that every new place, every new conversation, and every new perspective has something valuable to teach. Years later, Plato returned to Athens with a remarkable idea. Instead of entering politics, he would educate the people who one day might become politicians. Instead of trying to change society directly, he would change the minds that would eventually shape society. It was a brilliant idea, and honestly, one that still influences education today. Around 387 BC, Plato founded a school just outside Athens. He called it the Academy. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary place. Students gathered, teachers discussed ideas, people walked through gardens talking about life. But in reality, it was something revolutionary. Many historians consider it the first institution of higher learning in the Western world. Imagine being one of those students. You didn't simply memorize information. You questioned it. You debated it. You challenged it. You searched for evidence. Plato believed education wasn't about filling your mind with facts. It was about teaching your mind how to think clearly. Think about how different that is. Many people ask, "What should I think?" Plato wanted people to ask, "How should I think?" That small difference changes everything. Now here's something fascinating. The academy wasn't only about philosophy. Students studied mathematics, astronomy, politics, ethics, logic, and many other subjects. Plato believed knowledge was connected. Understanding one subject could help you better understand another. In many ways, he was encouraging interdisciplinary learning more than 2,000 years before the term even existed. Now let's talk about one student in particular. A young man arrived at the academy with an extraordinary curiosity. His name was Aristotle. At the time, nobody knew he would become one of the greatest philosophers in history, but Plato immediately recognized his potential. Aristotle remained at the academy for nearly 20 years. Imagine that, one great teacher inspiring another great teacher, who would later inspire countless others. It's almost like a chain stretching across history, knowledge passing from one generation to the next. Now here's one of Plato's most famous ideas. He believed that the physical world we see isn't the complete reality. According to his theory of forms, everything around us is only an imperfect reflection of perfect ideas. Imagine drawing a circle on a piece of paper. No matter how carefully you draw it, it will never be perfectly round, but in your mind, you understand what a perfect circle is. Plato believed that perfect ideas exist beyond the imperfect objects we experience every day. Whether people agree with this theory or not, it completely transformed philosophy. It encouraged people to think beyond appearances, to search for deeper truth. Not just what seems true, but what actually is true. Now imagine walking through the academy. Students aren't competing to prove they're the smartest. They're challenging one another's ideas, respectfully, curiously, patiently. For Plato, disagreement wasn't something to fear. It was part of learning. And honestly, that's a lesson many of us could still benefit from today. You don't always grow by talking. Sometimes you grow by listening to someone who sees the world differently. Now, before we finish this chapter, remember this. Plato's greatest achievement wasn't simply writing books. It wasn't creating famous theories. It was creating a place where people could spend their lives searching for wisdom together. Because he believed that one educated mind could influence a family, a community, a nation, and perhaps even the future of civilization itself. In the next chapter, we'll explore Plato's greatest ideas and discover why people are still studying them more than 2,000 years later. Chapter 3: The Ideas That Changed Human History. Some people are remembered because they built great cities, others because they won great battles. Plato was remembered because he changed the way people think. More than 2,000 years have passed since he lived. Empires have risen, empires have fallen, technology has transformed the world, yet students in universities across the globe still study Plato's ideas. Honestly, very few people in history have had that kind of influence. But what made his ideas so powerful? Let's start with one of the biggest questions he ever asked. What makes a good society? Most people would answer this by talking about money, or military strength, or technology. Plato saw things differently. He believed that the quality of a society depends on the quality of its people, and especially its leaders. Think about that. Imagine putting someone with no medical knowledge in charge of a hospital. It would be a disaster. Now imagine someone with no understanding of justice leading an entire country. Plato believed that leadership required wisdom, not just popularity, not just power, wisdom. That's why he introduced one of his most famous ideas, the Philosopher King. According to Plato, the best leaders should be people who truly love knowledge, people who seek truth, people who put the good of society above their own personal interests. Now, whether you agree with that idea or not, it raises an important question. Should leaders simply be popular, or should they also be wise? It's a question people still debate today. Now, here's another fascinating idea. Plato believed that education wasn't only about preparing people for careers. It was about shaping their character, teaching them to think critically, to control their emotions, to make ethical decisions. In other words, education wasn't just about earning a living. It was about learning how to live. Honestly, that's a beautiful way to think about education. Now let's talk about one of Plato's most famous stories, a story that has fascinated readers for centuries. It's called The Allegory of the Cave. Imagine a group of people who have spent their entire lives inside a dark cave. They're chained in one position. The only thing they can see is a wall in front of them. Behind them, a fire burns. Between the fire and the prisoners, people walk carrying objects. The prisoners can't see those people. They can only see the shadows on the wall. Since they've never experienced anything else, they believe those shadows are reality. Now imagine one prisoner escaping. For the first time, he walks outside. The sunlight hurts his eyes. Everything feels unfamiliar. Slowly, he begins seeing the real world. trees, mountains, the sky, people. He realizes the shadows were never reality. They were only reflections. Now imagine he returns to the cave to tell everyone the truth. Do they celebrate? Do they thank him? No, many refuse to believe him. Some even become angry. Why? Because people often resist ideas that challenge everything they've believed for years. Honestly, that's one of the most powerful psychological lessons ever written. The cave isn't just a story, it's a metaphor. Sometimes our assumptions, our habits, and our beliefs become invisible prisons. We accept them simply because we've never questioned them. Plato wanted people to leave their own caves, to question, to explore, to seek truth instead of comfort. Now think about modern life. How many opinions do we accept without really examining them? How often do we believe something simply because everyone else believes it? Plato would probably encourage us to stop, ask questions, look deeper, and think independently. That's one reason his philosophy still feels surprisingly modern. Now here's another lesson that made Plato extraordinary. He understood that asking the right question is often more valuable than having a quick answer. Many people rush toward certainty. Plato moved toward curiosity. He believed wisdom begins when we recognize how much we still have to learn. That's a lesson every lifelong learner can appreciate. Whether you're learning English, building a business, or simply trying to become a better person, curiosity will always take you further than arrogance. Now imagine two students. One believes they already know enough. The other believes there's always more to discover. 10 years later, which one is likely to have grown the most? Usually, the curious one, because curiosity keeps the mind alive. Now, before we finish this chapter, remember this powerful idea. Plato didn't want people to memorize his philosophy. He wanted people to continue questioning it, because for him, the search for wisdom never truly ends. And honestly, perhaps that's why his ideas have survived for more than 20 centuries. Not because he gave humanity all the answers, but because he taught humanity how to ask better questions. And in the next chapter, we'll discover why Plato's legacy continues to shape our schools, governments, science, and even the way we think today. Chapter 4: The Legacy That Never Disappeared. Most people are remembered for a generation. Some are remembered for a century. But only a handful of people continue shaping the world thousands of years after they're gone. Plato is one of them. Think about that. His books were written more than 2,000 years ago. Since then, countless civilizations have risen and fallen, languages have changed, technology has transformed the world, yet students are still reading Plato. Professors are still teaching his ideas. And philosophers are still debating his questions. Honestly, that's extraordinary. So how did one man's ideas survive for so long? The answer is surprisingly simple. Because Plato wasn't trying to solve temporary problems. He was asking timeless questions. Questions every generation must answer for itself. What is justice? What is truth? What makes someone a good leader? What is the purpose of education? How should we live? Those questions never become outdated. Every generation asks them again, and every generation discovers something new. Now let's think about education. Walk into almost any university today. Students attend lectures, discuss ideas, ask questions, challenge arguments, write essays, debate different perspectives, Without realizing it, they're following a tradition that Plato helped create. His academy wasn't simply a school, it became a model for education itself, a place where learning wasn't about memorizing information, it was about developing wisdom. And honestly, that's still what the best education tries to achieve today. Now, here's something fascinating. Plato's influence didn't stop with philosophy. His ideas reached politics, science, mathematics, psychology, ethics, literature, and even religion. Some people agreed with him, others strongly disagreed. But almost everyone felt they had to respond to his ideas. That's the sign of a truly influential thinker. Even the people who criticize him are still talking about him. Now imagine a world without Plato. Would philosophy have developed differently? Probably. Would education look different? Very likely. Would some of history's greatest thinkers have followed another path? Perhaps. That's because influence isn't always visible. Sometimes, the greatest influence happens quietly. One teacher inspires one student. That student inspires another, generation after generation, until an idea spreads across centuries. Now let's return to Aristotle, the young student who spent nearly 20 years learning at Plato's academy. After Plato's death, Aristotle developed many ideas of his own. He eventually became the teacher of another young man. His name was Alexander, later known as Alexander the Great. Think about that incredible chain. Socrates inspired Plato. Plato inspired Aristotle. Aristotle inspired Alexander. One conversation leading to another. One teacher influencing another. One generation shaping the next. It's a powerful reminder that knowledge doesn't end with one person. It continues through those willing to learn. Now here's another lesson we can learn from Plato. He understood that ideas are stronger than people. People grow old, empires disappear, buildings collapse. But ideas, when they're powerful enough, can outlive all of them. That's exactly what happened to Plato. His physical life ended long ago, but his ideas continue traveling around the world every single day. In classrooms, books, podcasts, universities, and conversations like the one we're having today. Now imagine a student opening one of Plato's books for the first time. They're separated from Plato by more than 2,000 years. Different language, different culture, different technology, yet somehow they're still having a conversation with him. That's the power of great writing. It allows ideas to travel across time. Honestly, very few achievements are greater than that. Now here's one final thought before we finish. Many people spend their lives chasing success, money, recognition, power. Plato chased something different, wisdom. He believed that if people became wiser, better decisions would naturally follow, better leaders, better societies, better lives. Whether or not you agree with every one of his ideas, it's difficult not to admire that goal. Now, before we move to the final chapter, remember this. True greatness isn't measured by how long someone lives. It's measured by how long their ideas continue improving the lives of others. And in the final chapter, we'll discover the timeless lessons Plato left behind. Lessons that can still help us become better thinkers, better learners, and better human beings today. Chapter 5. Plato's Timeless Lessons for Modern Life. Let's finish with a question. What can someone who lived more than 2,000 years ago possibly teach us about modern life? After all, our world is completely different. We have smartphones, artificial intelligence, social media, instant communication, technology Plato could never have imagined. Yet somehow, his ideas still feel surprisingly relevant. Why? Because although technology changes, human nature changes much more slowly. People still search for happiness, still struggle with fear, still make difficult decisions, still wonder what success really means. And honestly, that's exactly why Plato continues to matter. Now let's begin with his first great lesson. Never stop asking questions. Today, information is everywhere. In just a few seconds, you can search almost anything. But having information isn't the same as having wisdom. Plato would probably remind us not to believe everything we hear, not everything we read, not everything we watch online. Instead, he would encourage us to ask, is this really true? What's the evidence? Could there be another perspective? Those simple questions have never been more important than they are today. Now here's another timeless lesson. Choose wisdom over popularity. Modern life often rewards attention. The more followers, the more views, the more likes, the more successful someone appears. But Plato believed something very different. He believed popularity doesn't always equal truth. Sometimes, the wisest voice in the room isn't the loudest one. It's the calmest one, the one that's still learning, still listening, still questioning. Honestly, that's a lesson worth remembering. Now let's talk about learning. Many people believe education ends when school ends. Plato would completely disagree. For him, learning was a lifelong journey. There was always another book to read, another conversation to have, another question to explore. Imagine two people. One stops learning at 25, the other continues learning at 50, 60, or even 80 years old. Who do you think will continue growing? The answer is obvious. Curiosity keeps the mind alive. And perhaps that's one reason great thinkers never truly grow old. Now here's another lesson. Surround yourself with people who challenge your thinking. Not people who agree with everything you say. People who make you think, who ask difficult questions, who respectfully disagree. Growth rarely happens inside complete comfort. It happens when your ideas are tested, when your assumptions are questioned, when you're willing to admit, I hadn't thought about it that way. Honestly, that's not weakness. That's wisdom. Now let's think about success. Today, many people measure success by money alone. Plato measured it differently. He believed a successful life was one guided by wisdom, self-control, justice, and purpose. Think about that. Imagine becoming wealthy, but never finding peace. Imagine becoming famous, but never becoming kind. Would that really be success? Plato would probably say no, because he believed success begins inside, long before it appears on the outside. Now here's perhaps my favorite lesson from Plato. The quality of your life depends on the quality of your thinking. Every decision you make begins as a thought. Every habit begins as a thought. Every dream begins as a thought. If you improve the way you think, you slowly improve the way you live. That's an extraordinary idea. And honestly, it's just as true today as it was in ancient Athens. Now imagine Plato walking through one of our modern cities. He would probably be amazed by the buildings, the cars, the airplanes, the computers. But I think the first question he would ask wouldn't be about technology. It would be about people. Are they becoming wiser? Because for Plato, progress wasn't measured by faster machines. It was measured by better human beings. Now, before we finish this episode, I want to leave you with one final thought. Plato never claimed to have all the answers. In fact, his greatest gift wasn't giving humanity perfect answers. It was inspiring humanity to keep searching, to remain curious, to challenge assumptions, to seek truth, and to never stop learning. Perhaps that's the greatest legacy anyone can leave behind. Not making people think exactly like you, but teaching them how to think for themselves. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, knowledge can fill your mind, but wisdom has the power to change your life. Keep asking questions, keep learning, and never lose your curiosity, because every great thinker begins with one simple question. This chapter is finished. The full episode is now complete.